this is Jean here, Jean Truelove from Truelove Quilts for You. I'm going to be talking about our 2021 block party. Our block of the whatever, however I'm deeming it, we can go along to make it for you beginners. That's the whole point of this video now. If you people who have been following me along, you're probably advanced beginners, intermediate, experienced quilters. Not necessarily for you, because every single thing I say, you're going to understand and know what I'm talking about. But if you've only just thought, oh, I want to make a quilt, I have a sewing machine, oh, maybe I can do this. This is for you. But I'm going to dial it right back to the very, very basics. But the first thing I have to say about our block party and our quilting, at the end of the day, hopefully you'll make whatever you're going to be making, is this is a quilting tutorials, okay, to come. I'm not giving sewing lessons. You need to know your way around your own sewing machine. Everybody has their different sewing machines. You might have a small one that you bought at a big box store. You may have your grandmother have a straight stitch machine only. You may have a computerized machine, or you may have a mechanical machine. You may have a computerized machine. Whatever machine that you are going to be using, you are going to be needing to get out the manual if you are a beginner, and hopefully you will know your way, as I say, around a sewing machine. We are going to be 95% of our block, constructing our blocks, our 6.5 inch blocks, will be done with a straight stitch, just a regular stitch. People ask me what length they should put their stitch to. Every machine is different. Mine is a little less than 2. I like a little bit, you know, there's 10 stitches to an inch, 12 stitches, 15 stitches to an inch. The more stitches you have in a seam, the stronger it will be. However, if you need to pick something out as a beginner, it's a little bit harder. I have mine set at about 11 or 12 inches, stitches per inch. Again, your manual will show you that. As we're progressing, you're going to see that for our applique, our machine applique, you are going to be needing one of 3 stitches, either a blanket stitch, which I prefer. I love my blanket stitch, but my friend Jen, when she went a couple years ago using her grandmother's small little Kenmore machine, which was awesome, it didn't have a blanket stitch. It had a zigzag stitch. So she used a zigzag stitch. Most machines now have decorative stitches, and amongst them, the most popular, I think, are the blanket stitch, a zigzag stitch, and a satin stitch. But satin stitch is a very, very small zigzag stitch. So you're going to need to work out your tension. Don't be asking me, how do I thread it? How do I fill my bobbin? What's the tension? Because that's not the point. So work your way, find your way around your sewing machine. Again, the most important thing in quilting is is a 1/4 inch seam. Your 1/4 inch seam. In garment making, perhaps some of you have made clothes, as I was a garment maker for many, many years, 50 years, and then I started quilting. Garment making, you make your seams at 5/8 of an inch, 1/4 inch bigger than 1/2 an inch, a nice sized seam. In quilting, we make our seams at 1/4 of an inch, and you're thinking, oh, why is that? Why can't I just make all of my seams bigger or wider? That's what I'm used to. Well, it takes also into consideration the measurements, obviously, of all of the smaller pieces. But the main point is, in garment making, the seams are wider because you think of the stress and the strain that are put on the seams. You need a wider, heavier, a wider seam. In quilting, what we're doing is we're just sewing pieces together. Yes, there may be a million seams sewn at 1/4 of an inch, but once the quilt top is finished and then batted with the middle piece and then the backing and then quilted together, there's not strain. It's all flat and there's not as much strain, and all of the seams will most probably be reinforced with some kind of quilting stitch. Hence the reason for 1/4 of an inch. Very, very important that you perfect your 1/4 of an inch. You can mark your needle bed, the bed of your machine, the needle plate, with a 1/4 of an inch. Now again, it's very important that whatever rulers you are using. Now this is so funny because people are like, you would think, what are you talking about? Where is my ruler? Excuse me. Oh, this isn't my ruler. What the heck? Where's my rulers? Anyway, you want to make sure that whatever ruler, oh my goodness, where is it? That you're using is the measurements are consistent. You're thinking, what are you talking about? This is our 6.5 inch ruler. And you will be using either your 6.5 inch ruler and yet another ruler. I use a 2 ruler method when I'm quilting. But you want to make sure that all of your rulers are consistently the same 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, inch, 2 inches. And you might think, oh, of course, there's an industry standard. An inch is an inch, right? But there have been times when if you lay out a tape measure or a metal tape or a plastic tape measure to a ruler, that they could be a hair off, and it's not quite the same. So just make sure that the rulers that you're using and the table, the cutting mat that you're using, all of the measurements are the exact same. Perfect your 1/4 of an inch. Many machines have a 1/4 inch foot, and then they guide you. Again, look at your machine, look at your feet, practice, practice, practice to get that 1/4 of an inch, and actually measure your 1/4 of an inch seam. Extremely, extremely important. I'm going to come to fabric choice, and again, this is for new quilters because new quilters, because if you experience quilters and you know when you go into a fabric store what to expect, but maybe somebody who's new doesn't. Now, obviously, we're in America, so I do things by the yard. There are 36 inches to a yard. Somebody very kindly had said something about millimeters and centimeters. Sorry, that freaked me out. I know yards and inches, okay? Now, in America, you can buy fabric by the yard, okay? Now, this is a yard of fabric, all right? That's a yard of fabric, 36 inches, okay? Lovely, super. We will be needing, and again, people are like, well, what do I buy? It's all dependent on what you're making, and I'll come to that. We will be needing some yardage. I'll come to that. But also, in quilting, when you go into a shop, you will see something that says either charm squares or a jelly roll or a layer cake 10-inch squares or fat quarters, and you're thinking, what in the world is that? I'll start. A charm square pack are usually 5-inch pieces of fabric from a certain fabric line. There may be a few duplicates, but there may be, say, 30 different fabrics in this, from the same fabric line, from the manufacturer, in this little pack. 5-inch, perfectly cut from the factory, 5-inch squares. Super, super, super for small pieces, obviously. I don't have it with me. I don't have it. It's up there. There's also a thing called a jelly roll, or 2.5-inch strips. Again, it's a nice, neat little package of 2.5-inch strips, about 42 of them, 42 of them, 2.5 inches wide by the width of the fabric. Now, the width of the fabric is always measured from the fold of the fabric here as it comes off the bolt to the selvage. Now, you pull that out, it's about 42 inches. I always err on the 40-inch side because different manufacturers, some can be 44 inches, but I always think the width of my fabric is 40 inches by the time you neaten it up. So some of your jelly rolls are like 2.5-inch strips by long, long strips. Again, you can do a lot with 2.5-inch strips, but perhaps not as much as you. It doesn't yield quite as much fabric as you might need. Now, also, quilting manufacturers have made this. These are called 10-inch squares. They're exactly, from the manufacturer, they're exactly 10 inches square. This is a super way to start out. Again, there are 42 pieces in this packet. Isn't it funny? I've just realized I have my sampler quilt, which is red, and I've pulled all the red, my favorite color. I did not do that on purpose. It was funny. These were just at the top. That's funny. This is a pack of 10-inch squares. Lots of fabric, lots of fabric. Now, another way that you can get fabric is, which is the most common, and I've discussed this in my previous video, is a fat quarter. Now, you may be thinking, what in the world is a fat quarter? Fabric, as I was showing you, comes by the yard in this country. You can get however much. You can get a quarter yard, a half a yard, 2/3 of a yard. You can get a couple inches sometimes they can cut. Well, a quarter yard of fabric is 9 inches by, say, 42 inches, 40 inches, okay? That's a quarter yard of fabric, right? It's cut off the bolt. So you go to the store and you ask for a quarter yard of fabric. Well, in the quilting world, that's nice. That's super. That's awesome. But you may be needing an even larger piece to cut down. You might not need all of this fabric. You may not need all of that fabric. And you might need a bit of a larger piece if you're making a larger block. So what the quilting industry has done years ago, very clever, they have what's made a fat quarter. Now, a fat quarter is a quarter yard of fabric, but a fat quarter has been cut this way. It's cut 18 inches by, say, 22 inches. That's a quarter yard. Now, that bit of fabric is a lot of fabric to use in your quilting world. I prefer using fat quarters and then some yardage, which obviously you will need for borders or for perhaps sashing, but I prefer to use fat quarters. Now, the downside is you're going to be paying a premium for a fat quarter package. The manufacturers have the upside to me, and it outweighs the downside, because the manufacturer has taken, this is, say, 25 of their fabric line, 25 different pieces of fabric from a fabric line. They match, they coordinate, they complement each other. The manufacturer has already done that and cut 25 or 10 or however many fat quarters, all beautifully coordinating. Whereas if you went into a store, you cannot buy, you can't go, a beginner, you can't go and say, oh, excuse me, I love this bolt of fabric here. Can I have a 18 by 22 inch piece of fat quarter? They're not going to cut it off the bolt for you. You are going to get a quarter yard of fabric, half a yard of fabric, 2/3 of a yard of fabric. And it may not be exactly what you want for our smaller pieces. So I would recommend you do your homework and or go to a quilt store or go online or go to, a lot of places have catalogs, and you look for what are called pre-cuts. These are called pre-cuts. You have your fat quarters, you have your charm squares, you have your 10-inch squares, you have your jelly roll, and of course you have your yardage. Now, so that's how fabric is done. For our project, if you're going to be making a small table runner or a small placemat or a small baby quilt, you won't be needing all that much fabric. You may have an auntie or a grandmother or somebody who is a seamstress or who's a quilter and will give you scraps of fabric. That could very, very well work. Absolutely work. But if you're going to be making anything bigger, it all depends. When Jen and I embarked on our quilt that was the same size, this is about 66 inches, this is 66 inches by 72 inches, something like that, my sampler quilt. She started out with, I believe, 15 fat quarters and some yardage for her sashing. Now again, this is my sampler quilt. Behind me, this is a red and white quilt. Again, fabric choice is going to be your hardest or your most important financial outlay for making your quilt. Okay, you can get your tools together. You can go to big box stores and get rulers and scissors and everything, and even a cutting mat. But your fabric choice, whatever it will be, if you're going to be getting nice fabric from a fabric store or wherever, is going to probably be the most. A lot of people are saying to me, well, I like a certain fabric, but I don't know what fabrics go with it. I don't know. I went to a quilt store and I like this fabric, which is like a focal fabric, but I don't know what fabrics. I am not going to go into it right now, but I have several videos on it in the past using a color wheel. Color wheels are awesome. People say, oh, you coordinate colors so well together. I've learned an awfully lot from color wheel. So get yourself a color wheel, learn it. It's fun. It's exciting. Now, say you're overwhelmed and you're wanting to do a 2-color quilt like mine. I did a red and white quilt. My red and white quilt has burgundy, it has pinks, it has hot pinks, it has cherry reds, it has apple reds, it has tomato reds, it has creams, it has tan, it has whites. That's a 2-color quilt. And yet I had used maybe 30 different fabrics for my 2-color quilt. So there you go. If you want a 2-color quilt, there are so many manufacturers and so many quilt stores around that put the fabrics, as I said, in a bundle, and they've done the work for you. That's why I recommend you getting, especially for this type of project, which we're going to be using smaller pieces, I recommend you start with some either fat quarters, 10-inch squares, and I would say we are going to be using what is called a sashing. The sashing in here, right there. I would be using either some kind of a neutral. A neutral, again, as I was explaining, it does not have to be white. Jen said, oh, I thought when she did her first quilt, she said, I thought neutral was white. It can be any color. It can be a polka dot. You can think outside the box, but if you are using sashing, okay. Get to our project. Again, I'm leaving it up to you, and I'm going to be giving ideas. As I was saying in my last video, I want you beginners to not be under any time constraint. If you miss a video, you haven't really missed that much, because my videos are there until YouTube is there. That's it. But what we're doing is we are going to concentrate in the beginning for for a long time. We're going to be concentrating on making 6.5-inch unfinished, finished at 6 inches, because of that 1/4-inch seam on each side. That takes up the 1/2 inch. Blocks this size, okay? I showed you that before. Now, just again, for demonstration's sakes, what I have done on my little design board, remember I said make a little design board. And oh, Susan, thank you very much. There is another, Lori Holt has done on YouTube, has a how you make a design board. Again, mine's just felt hot glued onto a canvas. Here are 6.5-inch squares. Okay, so pretend that these are your finished blocks. They're pieced blocks. Okay, we've made a pretty 9 patch. Okay, so that I will have given you the instructions for that, and it finishes at 6.5 inches. Obviously, I haven't. This is just for demonstration. So here are our 6.5-inch blocks, finished blocks. Okay, now we have to put them together. So I have just overlapped my seams here. I've not sewn them together by 1/4 inch. 1/4 inch there, 1/4 inch there, 1/4 inch there, and 1/4 inch there. Okay. Now the reason I'm doing this is I have what I did is I made up a design pattern for you people, and this is it. I have my last video you saw. I did a grid of 10 blocks across, 12 blocks down. Say these are 6.5-inch blocks, okay? Now, by all means, you could have this and you've made all of these blocks, and again, when I'm teaching, I will show you how to make a simple block. You may want to make 5 of them. Awesome. You've just taken up 5 spaces. Or you might want to make 2 of them. You might want to make a row, and I will come to that because you're comfortable making that. You don't have to make 120 blocks at all to make a small quilt. So what I've done here with this pattern, there are my 6.5-inch blocks sewn together. Okay, now they are just sewn together. That could just be row by row by row by row by row. that's awesome. And as I was saying again in my last video, quite a lot of sampler quilts are put together that way. Block after block after block after block. All different, all different. So it would be, all of these blocks would be have just sewn together. I don't love that. And the reason I don't love, but other people do. And please, if you do, awesome, fantastic. Everybody has their own artist and their own design eye. I just feel if I sort of like, trying to explain, if I went to a museum, yeah, and I saw a beautiful Rembrandt and a Norman Rockwell and a Jackson Pollock and a Leonardo, another artist, whoever, Van Gogh. I see all these beautiful artworks, okay, and admire them, love them all. Well, I go to the gift store, right, and they have posters. They have posters of all of that artwork. I love them all. So would I go home and get these beautiful works of art and put them all next to each other on my wall? I probably wouldn't do that. I would treat each piece as a beautiful piece of art in itself. We are making small little pieces of art. Our little 6-inch blocks, to me, is a beautiful piece of art. Okay, what would I do with my posters? I would probably frame them. There comes in sashing. Here is sashing. And again, it's not to scale because I haven't put the 1/4 inch in there. So this sashing, say cut at 1.5 inches, and it shows at about 1 inch. It separates my blocks. Do you see that? And each block then becomes its own little piece of artwork, just as I have done on my red and white quilt and my first sampler quilt. I have highlighted each piece of art. Okay, so that's with sashing. Now again, I was talking about making a quilt with 6.5 inch blocks and 12.5 inch blocks and a larger block, okay? And this is where some math has come into it, and it won't come into it until very, very, very much later. We are going to be concentrating on making our 6-inch blocks. But what I've done here is I have cut a 12.5 inch block, okay? I've cut a 12.5 inch block there. Now if I want, and this is just one block, that's taking up 4 spaces on my grid, right? So I have those blocks and I have this block in a row somewhere interspersed in my design. Well, when it comes to, this is the same size as that sewn together, but if I put sashing in this becomes bigger. This becomes bigger. This row or this series becomes bigger. I would have to make this bigger. This is 12.5 inches, which I'm going to make my blocks at 12.5 finishing. So I might have to add a little bit of sashing in addition to the other sashing. So this block might have like a double frame. When we come to this, he was saying, well, if you don't make your pieces bigger to make this bigger, if people are using sashing, again, I'm probably speaking Greek to you, you don't have to worry about that. He said you would just have to add to the eye, just as an artist does or as a builder does. You would have to add your piece to make this a little bit bigger. Again, people were saying, even perhaps experienced quilters are saying, how do you fit in a big block with the seam allowances to smaller blocks? Well, at the end of the day, when we go to put our quilt together, I will be showing you how I'm going to do that. And again, I do tend to, as somebody said, don't start ripping things. I do tend to rip and whatever. I won't be doing that. I will try to explain what I'm doing. And as I always say, when people are watching me, sometimes I feel I do real in-depth tutorials, I do, but then sometimes I always say, just look over my shoulder and watch what I'm doing. Now, I won't be doing that like so, gallant, like, oh, watch me, because as beginners, I will show you. You can watch me over my shoulder and I will show you exactly what I am doing. Now, but it all depends on what quilt you are going to be making. I keep saying that. If you want to just sew your squares together, your blocks together, awesome. I will be looking at my comments as I do, and if there are any questions at any point in, at any point in our blocks concerning our quilting blocks, I will be glad to answer them. If you're ready to put together a placemat, and sewing together and you want to know how to finish it, I can maybe do a quick video on how I would finish a placemat, or even a pot holder, or a little tiny baby quilt, veering off a little bit. Try to stay on the road for the most part, but because everybody's choosing what they're making. Now again, well, what am I going to be making? Here again, this is a standard, okay? This is, you're making half the blocks. You're overwhelmed making all these blocks, so well, I'm gonna take it a break. I'm gonna give it a break. Well, by all means, give it a break. You can watch, but I'm not doing that this week. What I've done here is, on my grid, I've just done every other block. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 5 blocks right in that top row, but there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 plain blocks. A neutral. It could be white, it could be gray, it could be black, it could be a stripe, it could be a pattern, whatever your neutral would be. But as you can see here in my design, my neutrals give my blocks air. You see that? It breathes. I like sashing, I like framing, I like, you know, seeing my blocks. So that's one design. Another, this design here, again, this design was, and for argument's sake, I'm working now with 6.5-inch blocks. Forget my 12-inch, that's way down the road. So again, this grid has sashing between all the blocks. And again, you can do 5 blocks. You've used up 5 spaces. But then I will be showing you how to put the sashing on your quilt. Now here's another one that I was talking about. And this I think is really quite effective. Here's row by row. Say you have a bunch of yellow fabric, and you have 5 or 6 shades of yellow fabric, and maybe yellow and a white, or yellow and a cream, or whatever. And you make 20 blocks. Maybe 5 of them are the same because you like that one. All in yellows. Well, this is right now. This is a row by row quilt. I have seen these. Now this is an exception to the rule, that all the yellows are just sewn together. All the yellows are just sewn together. You're just sewing them 10 across and 10 across, and you have all pretty yellow blocks, a row on our grid here. The next one, you get oranges. I'm not saying that my colors, it's your color, whatever. But say you have all oranges, and then the next row is all pinks, the next row is all reds, the next row is all blue, and the last row is all green. All shades. 30 different reds, right? 30 different reds and whites. So that might appeal to you when you're looking for fabric, or when you're looking at fat quarters, or when you're looking at scraps. That might appeal to you, that layout. So we have that layout, that layout, that layout. Now this is another one that I had told you to go on sort of Pinterest. This was an idea that it was really cute. This is like a stepped down, okay? There's only 4 blocks there. And then there's 6 blocks there. Then there's 8 blocks, 10, 12, 14, okay? Well, you're saying, well, that's all very well and good. Again, I'm just showing this in the colorways. Well, what do I do over here? Well, that could just be strips of fabric. Again, if you were doing this, again, I would veer off and I would explain to you how you would just, fill this in. But I've seen this quilt, in particular this quilt, which is like stepping down, okay, with a applique of a black silhouetted cat. Cat's walking up the stairs, cat's going down the stairs, real sweet. And this over here. That's the general gist of this. You could fill these in with beautiful little applique flowers. And then there's this design here, as I was saying the other day. This is a cross. This could be your neutral, just here. You don't feel like doing it. These are just 20 blocks here. Maybe they're the same. Maybe you do 20 blocks there, 20 blocks there, 20 blocks there. And then you just add your sashing in the middle. Maybe put a pretty applique, which I will be showing you. Our appliques are not going to be hard. Now, you're saying, well, Jean, that's all very well and good. I'm not doing that. What the heck are you doing? I'll follow along with what Jean's doing, right? Well, I'm so confused. I'm a beginner. I don't know what you're doing. Now this might confuse you even more because it's not to scale. If you were watching the last couple videos of me working on my Phoenix quilt, right? The one that rose from the ashes, the black and all of the bright colors. You will see that that's what is almost known as a medallion quilt. I've said this before. A medallion quilt is a piece in the middle and then borders around. And you're just sort of adding either blocks or borders, and you're just building. You're building your quilt from the inside out. This doesn't make any sense because it's not, I'm going to show you my pattern, what I'm thinking, because it's not, it doesn't have the frames on it, okay? This doesn't have the frames on it. It's just my grid. But this will be this will be what I'm making, but it's going to look a lot better than that. I am choosing to make, and I will be demonstrating perhaps over a few weeks because it has a lot of pieces, not hard whatsoever. I'm going to be making a 24-inch square. 24 inches. Now, I just wanted to show you 24. I'm like, I don't want this to go on forever, right? I want to see a quilt at the end of the day. This is 24 inches. I'm going to be making a quilt block that big. Tons of pieces in it. Probably 2 or 2.5, 3-inch. I'm not quite sure the design. I have a design in mind, but I have to get my husband Ian in to resize it. I don't do that. I don't know how to do that at all. It's math. To make my block this big, right? My center block. I want something that my eye can rest on and focus on. That's the whole purpose of my quilt. I'm using my K facet fabric, which I will explain to you in a minute. But because it's bold and because it's bright, saturated colors, I am going to be needing a neutral. So on my block, this is just, I've just pulled this. On my center block, Ian came in, as I was explaining to me, he says, well, your math doesn't work, Jean, because your center block at 24 inches, if you have all of these blocks sashed, perhaps, your math doesn't work. So you're going to be needing to put a border on my block. Again, this is way, way, way down the road. Don't worry about what I'm doing. These are 12-inch blocks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 12-inch blocks, and then my 24-inch block. And then interspersed with my other blocks, but I'm also going to be putting borders around my blocks. When it comes to it, it sounds difficult and hard, but I will show you what I'm doing, my quilt, all along the way. Now I have chosen this fabric. I'm starting out, I have chosen 25 fat quarters from K Facet. Because my quilt will be larger than 60 inches by 72 inches. It will be larger. So I want my quilt larger. This quilt behind me is 67 inches wide by 78 inches long. So that's a decent throw size quilt. I might be making mine even larger than that. And again, the patterns that I'm showing you, the basic patterns that I'm showing you, might be what you want to do. You might just want to make a quilt that looks like that. Super, 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 super. And then finish it, maybe even put a little bit of a border around it, make a little baby quilt, make a little lap quilt. You don't have to worry about not understanding, because I am going to be doing something a bit more complicated, but I'm going to be explaining the process every single step of the way so that you can follow along. Now again, wrapping this up to a certain extent, you want to get in mind, just get in mind what you be wanting to make. Do you want to make something simple? I've given you a few ideas, but right now, choose your fabrics. Fabric manufacturers pretty much have fabrics, you know, so you can choose, get a small amount or a large amount if you think you're going to be enjoying this, and just make our blocks. Just make our 6.5 inch blocks. Get a bit of yardage, get a couple yards of neutral, whether it be white or gray or black, whatever your neutral might be. You might want to think about that. I'm going to be doing applique blocks, as I have shown you. I showed you before, and I showed you very quickly my heart that I cut out. I cut out a fleur-de-lis. I will be giving you, you know, you're saying, oh, you don't have a pattern for that. Well, you know I don't have patterns. Don't ask me to write these things down. I give you perfect measurements. I label every single thing that we cut. I label that you need to cut 2.5 inch squares, and I show you that. But as far as the instructions for putting the block together, that's pattern writing. I don't do that. I don't know how to do that. I'm not inclined to do that. My video is my tutorial. So, but I just wanted to share with you this. This looks a bit deformed, but again, I just sort of cut my piece of paper, right, like you do in school, and then I just sort of cut it, and I made sort of a deformed looking butterfly. But like this could be an applique, and again, I'll explain to you. So each one of your butterflies could look as deformed as mine, right? Because we're not artists. But all I'm saying is, when you make your heart, you can make it curvy or whatever. And I quite like the fact that I have applique. This is a Dresden plate. That was one of my one of my last ones that I had done, my Dresden plate on this quilt here, because I showed you actually how to make the little Dresden plate template. It's a little bit more advanced. That's a machine applique. So that's that. You want as I was saying before, you want a nice hot iron. A nice hot iron. I use a Lisso Pro. It's an iron. Everybody's like, if you do watch me, it's an Lisso Pro. You hold it and it lifts up. You never have to put it on its end. I like my iron. It's a little bit more threads, whatever your budget will allow. The only thing with thread is you can use poly thread, you can use cotton. It doesn't, whatever is your preference. Some machines like this, some machines like that. If you have your grandmother's sewing box or an auntie's sewing box and there's a bunch of thread in it, just thread can get brittle and it can dry out and it can break easily, and you do not want that in your machine. So if you come across something, pull it, like really pull it. If it breaks under tension, toss it. It's no good. You're putting your time and your effort and your money into your project. You want the best that you can afford. Don't be swayed. My last thing is, do you pre-wash your fabrics? I don't. That's a whole nother debate, actually. I will use these fabrics as they come from the manufacturer. I do not have allergies. I do not have chemical, things that bother me. A lot of people take their time, and I have neither the time nor the inclination nor the energy to wash all my fabric, iron it, get it nice back and crisp like it comes. I prefer my fabric right off the bolt. I've only had, and then I wash my quilt afterwards with a ton of color catchers. I've only had one accident in 16 years of quilting. I used a red fabric, 30-year-old fabric. It was my fault. I was stupid. I used it, my whole entire quilt turned pink. It was a very pretty pink quilt when I washed it. It's all right. It was fine. So if you want to wash, by all means, knock yourself out. So that's that. Get yourself a color wheel if you're not sure about color choices. Choose your fabrics. There are tons of places to buy fabrics online. I have never had an issue with buying fabric online. The ideal world is to go into a quilt store. As things are opening in this country here, quilt stores are open. Some of them you need an appointment. That would be awesome. You want to sometimes, and again, if budget constraints, always head to the back of the store. That's where they have their clearance fabric. Most quilt stores, their clearance fabric. So you can get fabrics for $4 or $5 a yard that in this country could very well be $11, $12, $13 a yard. So again, whatever your budget is, I've said it before, if you've been gifted fabric, if you have a ton of scrap fabric, and you know the look that you want. Just try to get it the look for you beginners. Hopefully my friend Jen can come and share what she's been doing. She's been locked down at home also, but she's going to be following along and yeah, rooting us all on. So here's to our successful 2021 block party. Watch this space, folks. All right. See ya. Love from the Trueloves. Bye.